Okay, welcome to the Asheville City Council, March 26, 2023. This is 2023, but it's 2024.
It is definitely
Just for the
2024.
record, it's 2024. Budget work session, and I'm going to turn it over to our city manager, Deborah Campbell.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I know this is a long day for you all, and we have a lot of information that we want to cover as it relates to the budget. We have, since December, been trying to provide literally monthly updates on the budget process, and we still have several more months to go. So this is our March update, and we will be asking for some direction, some guidance from you all, particularly, excuse me, as it relates to the capital planning and GO bond process. We will be getting into a whole lot of detail about the CIP as well as our operating budget. But before we do, just a bit of an acknowledgement. We have Taylor Floyd, who is here. He's our Finance and Management Services manager, and a conspicuous and obvious person that's missing is Tony McDowell. He is out on medical leave. We hope that he will be back for our April work session. So keep him in your thoughts and send him positive energy. But we do have lots of other budget staff, and we have the Assistant Director of Finance here, and we think between this village, hopefully we can make up for Tony's absence. So Taylor, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Taylor Floyd, Budget Manager. No one's as eager for Tony to get back to work as I am. So yeah, speedy recovery to Tony McDowell. So yeah, as the manager said, we do have quite a bit to cover today. Hopefully you all find it informative. And again, we're looking for some feedback, but we will go ahead and get started. So our key takeaways, as you would expect, our recommended budget, when we make that recommendation in May, will align with the community's and our organizational priorities. At a high level, we are seeing increasing costs that are outpacing our revenue growth in the general fund, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today. Therefore, we're likely to need to utilize revenue from fund balance, as we did in the current year budget. We're always, as always, focused on recruiting and retaining a talented workforce because that is essential to our service delivery. So we'll talk a little bit about compensation. We'll also talk about our general obligation bonds, which is an opportunity to help us address our significant capital needs. And then we'll kind of preview your formal council meeting this evening with some information about changes to fees and charges. Those revenues generated from those changes are key to helping us address our needs, especially in our enterprise funds. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk a little bit about the budget, the online budget survey that we did in the month of February. Again, we'll talk kind of at a high level about our general fund, our baseline revenues and expenditures, talk a bit about compensation and some other additional investments we're looking to make, give you all an update on our general obligation bond planning, and then, as I said, the fees and charges overview. So briefly, our budget development process here at the city, we're kind of, again, right at the end of that priorities into the decision making, which is, again, why we're looking for some information from you all. We'll start to kind of hone in on stuff in April, and that'll culminate in the proposed budget, the manager's proposed budget in May, and then hopefully adoption in June before July starts our new fiscal year. We're kind of bridging these two lines here at the work session right now, fees and charges again at your formal meeting this evening, and then we have another work session scheduled for 2 weeks from now, April 9th, and then the proposed budget presentation at your formal meeting May 14th, followed by the public hearing and budget adoption in June. As always, our guiding principles, we want to make sure that we're resourcing departments to meet service delivery expectations, that we're providing efficient services and enhancing customer value, and that we're aligning our resource allocation with community council and staff goals. You all have established your next fiscal year council priorities at the retreat in February. Mostly a carryover from our previous priorities with the slight wording change to improve and maintain infrastructure and core services. All right, so moving into our budget public survey. Just a little bit of kind of overview before I get into that. We have a number of things that we use to inform our budget decisions. Those include previously adopted plans like the GAP plan, our January budget public comment at council, the National Community Survey, and then ongoing plans, which include the Recreate Asheville, so that's the Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Plan, and our Affordable Housing Plan. And then we have opportunities to continue that input and information sharing with the community moving forward. We will have, of course, our budget public hearing as statutorily required, and then there'll be a number of opportunities to engage on the GO bond between now and the election in November of this year. So a brief overview of what was in the survey. We did have a memo that goes into some greater detail, provides the questions and the responses. But we had a total of 10 questions, not including the optional demographics questions. Those are primarily, we asked folks to prioritize our services and also prioritize some capital investments. And then we asked kind of some follow-up questions, trying to dig a little bit deeper on some of the priorities that were identified in last year's survey. And the survey was open mostly for the month of February, between January 23rd and February 23rd. We tried to let folks know about this opportunity in a variety of ways. Myself and another staff member were on WRES, which was always a good time. Mountain Express and WLOS also picked up the survey in the media. We have, of course, city channels, recreation centers, making sure folks are aware that are coming into our facilities, and then outreaching to neighborhood groups, community groups, business contacts. Again, more detailed list is provided in the memo, but I do want to especially thank Natalie Bailey, who's in our division, that's really spearheaded this work so far. So looking at the responses, we had just under 1,000 total what we're calling valid responses. We did cull out anyone that self-reported their zip code as not in the city of Asheville, which there were some of those. Unfortunately, we can't kind of get down to the level of saying, like, are you definitely in or out? We use this zip code. So there's likely some people outside of the city that are in these zip codes that responded, but we think this is pretty close to city residents. And then looking at just a few pieces of information on the response demographics. Again, these are optional questions, so not everyone responds to these questions, but of those that did, we had a pretty representative distribution from an age perspective. And then looking at from a race demographics, the respondents were more white and less Black and Hispanic than Asheville's population per census figures. And they also included a higher proportion of households that are in middle income brackets. So again, in the survey, that's households between 50,000 and 125,000. So those are slightly overrepresented in the results as well. So again, a brief kind of overview of what we heard from the survey. I don't think there were any surprises, aligns with our last year's survey and other information we've received from the community. Priorities in affordable housing and homelessness, community safety and emergency response, and facilities maintenance. We saw specifically some strong support for our community responder program. Looking on the capital side, priority of housing was kind of the clear top one, but greenways, sidewalks, and road resurfacing were all kind of right close to each other and highly ranked. We also asked a question, again, trying to kind of dig a little bit deeper from what we heard in the previous year, about how we are making some of our capital investments. So the question was essentially, should we be looking at kind of projects that are bigger in scale, so incorporating sidewalk improvements, street trees, again, things like that, streetscaping, versus trying to just maximize the amount of resurfacing we're doing with that funding. And so we heard support for more comprehensive investments in fewer locations, but we did, again, also hear, we want you to maintain your current infrastructure and resources. Any questions on the survey before I move on? All right. So moving into the general fund, kind of baseline expenses, and revenues. This is really kind of how we do the budget. We kind of try to start from what is it going to cost for us to continue delivering our existing services at the existing service level, and what are we expecting on the revenue side before we start adding kind of new or expanded investments. We showed you all before. Overall, things look good, but we have seen slowing revenue growth, and that's really in line with what we saw historically kind of before the pandemic. That's primarily related to slowing sales tax. We did appropriate $8.1 million in the current year budget to balance the budget, so that kind of starts us off a little bit behind, and we're trying to work to figure out how to bridge that gap. And we continue to see in our community economic pressures that are impacting the cost to deliver existing services. We see a competitive job market. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we do have a number of opportunities. One is that we have fund balance available to appropriate again next year due to our good financial management. We're looking to leverage other revenue sources. Again, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the community responder program where available. And then, as always, we're working collaboratively to try to minimize those cost increases. As you all know, property tax is our main source of revenue in the general fund, followed by sales taxes. We do have some other charges for fees and services. We get some intergovernmental revenue and a number of other things. But again, property tax, the overwhelming majority at about 48%. We've shown this to you all, I think, a couple times now. This is updated, so we actually have 6 months of sales tax data for the current fiscal year, although this chart has not changed. So we can continue to see essentially flat revenue as it relates to sales taxes compared to last year, which again, as you can see, last year we saw through the first 6 months of the year, 10% growth. The year before that, 20% growth relative to the previous year. So some flattening there. The North Carolina League of Municipalities recently released their projections, revenue projections. These are all done kind of at a statewide level, but it kind of helps us gut check to see if the assumptions that we're making are in line with what other folks are seeing across the state. I did want to include this quote, essentially that post-pandemic boom in sales taxes has come to an end, and that's, again, something that we're seeing statewide. So far for the first 6 months at the state level across all of the North Carolina's 100 counties and numerous municipalities, seeing current fiscal year growth of about 2.5%, which is a bit above ours, which again is essentially zero. So based off of that, what the league is projecting is 2.9% growth to finish the fiscal year, and then 2.2% growth looking forward to next fiscal year. And they always kind of caveat their revenue projections to say, don't use our projections, consider local factors. So again, I think for us, as we look at things kind of maintaining or continuing at that flat level that aligns with this, statewide, seeing that 2.5% growth, and then looking at suggesting 2.2% for next year. Right now, we're continuing to assume that things will level off and kind of maintain at where we are right now. So what does that look like from an overall general fund revenue perspective? We're seeing normal growth in property taxes around 2%. Again, the sales tax essentially flat, a little bit of increase related to some of the other sales taxes on like rental vehicles and stuff like that. So again, a small increase there, a slight dip in intergovernmental, some increases in licenses, permits, and fees. Again, those are development-related things, parks and recreation fees, things of that nature. Some really good news on investment earnings. Those have been really strong in the current year, and even though we're likely to see some interest rate reductions from the Federal Reserve next year, we think that our investment earnings will continue to be strong into next year. So a good bump, but that's not, again, a huge revenue source for us. And then we have a variety of other revenues that we are looking up again, but not a substantial impact overall. So broadly speaking, again, we're seeing about $3.8 million in new revenue in the general fund. But again, remember that we have that $8.1 million fund balance that we kind of started off our budgeting with in the current year. Any questions about revenues before I transition to the other side of the equation? All right. Again, as you all are aware, on the expenditure side, personnel is our largest piece of our pie, or I guess this is a donut technically, at 62%, followed by our operating costs, which is a variety of things from contracts to materials. Just some examples of information, or some places where we're seeing increases on the operating side. One, as has been the case for I think the last 8 or 9 years at this point, is the state mandated employer retirement contribution is going up, and that's a significant increase. So that's what the city pays into the state retirement system for our employees. We're also estimating overtime costs to go up slightly. And then, and these are just examples, this is not a holistic list, but we have a number of contractual increases, including the building security for this building and the public works building. And I'm gonna bounce around a little bit here, our APD camera technology. So that's the contract for the equipment, the body-worn cameras, the fleet cameras, the interrogation room cameras, and all of the underlying items that go with that. They've renegotiated that contract. So we're seeing a big increase there, upgrading some of that and some of that technology. Our HR information system, and I will say that should be 50,000 and not 150,000, error on my part. And then just another example of a place where we're seeing some increases is material. So across all of our departments, that specific line is up around $126,000. And that's kind of, think of that as mostly small capital repairs. So that's staff making repairs to parks, making repairs to facilities, making repairs to streets and sidewalks. So it's kind of the stuff that they need to make those repairs. So again, seeing those costs escalate over a variety of things, but just trying to give you an idea of what that looks like. Another place where we're seeing some significant additional costs is in our transit fund. So as you all know, that's supported significantly by the general fund, and we're estimating we'll need an additional $2.7 million of general fund support just to maintain the existing service in transit. And that's primarily related to two things. One is just the increasing cost of that service. Most of that is related to the contract with our service provider. But the bigger part is in the current budget, we appropriated $2 million of ARPA funding to fund transit, and that's one time. So we expect to utilize that in the current year to fund that service. So we have to backfill that to maintain it. We do have a comprehensive operational assessment underway for transit. That's going to look at a variety of things to recommend improvements and efficiencies, including looking at routes, ridership, staffing, fleet, potential for other vehicles as part of the fleet, and then also looking at the transit master plan recommendations to see how we might be able to fund those and implement those moving forward. And of course, we're continuing to have discussions with the county on how we might be able to partner with them as it relates to transit service as well. As I said, because of our good financial stewardship and that strong sales tax growth that we've seen post-pandemic, we are in a good financial position. We did appropriate a significant amount, $8.1 million of fund balance in the current year budget. We expect that we may need to utilize as much as $7.2 million of that based on our current estimates. We'll certainly update that, and if that number changes, we'll let you all know. But kind of where that leaves us is we think we have around $2.5 million in fund balance available above the 15% fund balance policy target for use in next year's budget. And again, you all have seen this before, but just as a reminder, our policy target at that 15% level, you can see we've kind of maintained more or less between 15 and 20 for the most part over the last 10 years, and expect to end this current fiscal year, again, above that 15% target at around 17.7%. So to summarize, kind of, again, our base revenue and expenditures in the general fund, revenue growth we're seeing is more typical of pre-pandemic levels. We are seeing the cost to deliver our existing service increase. That growth is outpacing our revenue increase, so we're likely to need to appropriate fund balance in next year's budget. And as a result of all of that, we do have some limited opportunities to fund new or expanded services in next year's budget. Any questions?
Go ahead. My head is like wanting a calculator and wondering if I'm doing simple math and it's accurate or if it's more complex. But when I see across several slides that we had appropriated 8.1 in this year, so we're going to need to make that up. That's on slide 26, that we could potentially have 2.5 available. I'm just trying to get to, like, are we at a distillation point of what's our starting negative?
Yeah, so great question, and we will have some more specific information. We're working with departments right now. Again, we always are trying to kind of flatten the expense side as much as we can, so we wanted to do that work first before we brought kind of a gap, if you will, to you all to say this is where we think we're at. So we'll have that information for you at the next.
But all this is signaling that that we're expecting some type of gap.
Well, so
I
wait,
think she's asking
let me
about
understand,
fund
are you asking if the 8.1 is recurring expenses that we're gonna have to fill a hole on, or are they one-time expenses that we just allocated fund balance toward?
I am not asking either of those. I'm just seeing like a couple different pieces across here going like, do we know that there's a gap? All the signal is saying we have modest revenue growth at best, and we're starting a little bit in the hole, and then we're
Okay,
gonna have some.
you're talking about a general fund expense gap.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
sorry,
then
I
was
wasn't,
putting-
I thought you were talking about it.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it
and-
sounds like we're still crunching a lot of that, but the signal that I'm getting is, don't anticipate a significant amount of new monies, and anticipate creative problem solving to make sure that we're balanced.
Yes, and I do want to point out, I appreciate you bringing up, or I guess the mayor brought up the one-time expenses.
Right.
Just to acknowledge that 8.1 was not all, funding recurring items. We did have a number of one-time things. So I should clarify to say that we didn't start off our budget development in an $8.1 million hole, just to be clear.
Thanks.
And I think it's essentially what we are trying to message, and I think you hit it on the head in terms of,
Tighten the belt.
I'm sorry,
Tighten the belt is,
we're gonna have to tighten the belt. The honeymoon is over in terms of the sales tax increases, honeymoon that we had. But we are also not just saying we need to tighten our belt. We're also saying, and talking with the departments, are we delivering our services as efficiently as possible? Do we need to continue possibly some of the things that we are doing, or not continue those? So we're looking internally, operationally, to see if there are opportunities for us to kind of, I guess, tighten our belt or be more efficient or do the things that we need to do to make sure that we are managing scarce resources as efficiently as possible. But we are not going to departments and saying, cut 5% out of your budget. We are not doing that. We are being very strategic and tactical. And I think we'll get to these in terms of what are the communities and the city's priorities, and let's make sure that we are honing in on addressing, in particular, the priorities that you all identified for this year. But also, what do we think, again, from an operational perspective, how can we get leaner but still be impactful and effective in terms of that service delivery?
Thank you, Taylor, for another great presentation.
We're not done yet.
Yeah, we got a long ways
For
to
this
go.
part, okay, so, but I have two questions about this part, the base. Two of the things that we added last year that I want to make sure we're talking about are in the base budget, because we had agreed upon them, is the reparations fund. We talked about a built-in percentage, that's in the base.
Correct.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And the second one is we had a supplemental income for our firefighters that we were anticipating budgeting around $250,000. And they took advantage of the program. And so it would help me to know what amount we've built into the base.
I can get you the specific number, but that is also included.
Okay, so it would help to know if it's the $250,000 again, or if we realize the need and we want to retain our folks, so we're going to build in more. So thank
Yes,
you.
the second one, for sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, in terms of things that were approved last year on an ongoing basis, we're still continuing to
Right.
fund those things as part of the base.
Thank you.
So as I said, limited opportunities to fund new or expanded items, but we do have a few things we wanted to mention. I think we showed this to you all at your retreat. This was from our internal retreat, the services that we identified where we need to do some more work and look to opportunities to improve or expand. I will generally kind of say the items on the right-hand side of this slide we'll save for the capital discussion and general obligation bond opportunities. And really the left is kind of more primarily operational in nature, so we'll hit a few of those items. One of them, and again, something that we heard some support for from our budget survey, is the community responder program. Again, as an example of an opportunity, this is an existing organizational work plan item. It aligns with your goal of reimagining public safety. It includes collaboration both between partner departments and with community partners. And this is a space where we have some revenue that we can put towards this program. I did italicize, bold that initial. We do have opioid funding that will help offset the cost of this service next year. If you all will recall, that's kind of strung out over, I want to say it might be as many as 20 or maybe more than that years on the opioid settlement funding.
Yeah, it's we're talking about it all as one, but it was multiple opioid settlements, generally speaking, 20-year time frame with front-loaded payments. So those payments are going to continue to decrease over that period.
Right. So kind of just to give you all a sense of what that looks like. So we have around $572,000 of opioid settlement funds that we've already received or expect to in the current year. And then we also, if you'll recall, had a grant that we got from the Dogwood to help us do some planning. Kind of transition that grant with their approval into some more operational items and have already hired, or at least advertised to hire a staff person to help with the community responder program. So we have some resources available that will help us fund the community responder program, but that funding, kind of looking out a little farther, it varies year to year, but it's around $200,000 annually. So we can stand this up. We have some funding that will offset the costs. So again, this is a place where we're looking to make that investment.
And as part of that program, we are also looking at hiring two peer support staff people as well, such that our firefighters will then have a person that they can partner with to address some of the kind of social and behavioral and mental health issues that remarkably our staff have been able to address, but we think we could stand that program up and be a whole lot more effective and impactful if we had peer support workers accompanying them.
So another opportunity to invest and expand in a service is sanitation, again, in large part due to the fact that we, if approved, would have additional revenue from a sanitation fee increase to fund those additional costs. That'll help us with, again, just helping to offset the cost of providing our existing service, including any compensation changes that we make for employees. And we have a built-in increase in the recycling contract year over year, so offsetting some of those costs, but also allow us to make some investments in our yard waste and bulky collection and improving our recycling outreach with some additional staff resources there. So looking at compensation, again, as I said, we want to continue to invest in our employees because that is an essential piece of our service delivery. We do have some challenges, the main one being that we are unlikely to be able to fund adjustments at the same level as last year. We'll remind you all of some of those items that we did fund in the current year budget. Our labor market remains competitive, which again is a little bit of a challenge as we see our revenues moderating, and the strong housing market here in Asheville continues to drive up a living wage calculation. So we do have some real challenges. We are targeting the Just Economics Pledge living wage rate and considering some additional adjustments. We're working to develop pay for performance and other pathways for employee growth. Those things are likely to be in future years, future budget years, but those are things that we're important, things we're working towards. And then we also have the HR assessment that will help us align that function with some of our organizational needs. So as I said, compensation and benefits are the largest component of the city's budget. We've invested significant resources over the last few fiscal years in compensation, and we're working, again, to implement a compensation philosophy that includes a pay-for-performance component. So looking at what those increases have been, these percentage increases are not like what employees received. This was the dollar increase budget to budget year over year. So you can see over the last 3 years, we have made some substantial investments. You all have made some substantial investments in compensation and benefits for our employees, again, in large part due to that availability of sales tax revenue. As a reminder, we made a number of changes in the current year budget, including the main one being a 5% increase for staff, 6% for sworn APD personnel. We made an additional, we're seeing our healthcare costs go up. We added a match program for a part of our 401k. Again, I won't go through all of those. I do continue to leave the APD certification, or I'm sorry, the AFD certification incentive at what we budgeted it, but to Councilmember Roney's point, we will fully budget what we anticipate the cost of that program to be in this year's budget. But this is what we budgeted for the current year. As we're looking at making changes to our compensation philosophy, it is really about balance and trade-offs and trying to balance these kind of sometimes competing goals of rewarding performance, providing those pathways for growth for employees, making sure we're keeping good staff, and then providing a living wage to our employees. So as I said, we are targeting the Just Economics pledged rate, which is in the middle of that there at $39,520 annualized. That is a 4% increase from our current base, which is listed just above it. We also know that we will have to make another employer addition to the employer health contribution. One thing that I want to make sure that we will likely also make adjustments to the employee side of health costs, but we'll make sure that any increase on the healthcare costs for employees is less than any compensation increase. So again, the point being, like, we don't want to give people an increase on their pay, but then take it away on the health cost side. So we'll make sure that, that we do that. And then we continue to look at options for retiree health insurance, and we'll bring some additional information about those moving forward. But really trying to focus on what we can do on the compensation side for employees. And just
And Taylor, if we could, I know you're going to get to this next slide that shows how many would be impacted, employees would be impacted with the Just Economics Pledge living wage increase. I just want to stop here because we usually have lots of conversations about Just Economics living wage. How comfortable are you all with where this is what we're looking at, the pledged living wage? We need to hear if we need to be doing something differently because, as we've said, compensation is just about the most significant part of our budget.
Can we look at you
Sure.
look like you went, I mean, it seems like we
You
need
go
to
to
look
the-
at the next slide to
You
have
can
that
go to the next
conversation.
slide.
Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
So, yeah, so again, essentially it would be making sure that at the bottom end, so our minimum salary would be increasing to that pledged living wage rate, which is a 4% increase. So again, that would likely mean, not likely, that would mean that these 16 employees would undoubtedly get a 4% increase. As far as what we would be looking at citywide, again, some of that depends on where we end up on that base, as we were talking about earlier. So we don't have a definitive recommendation for you as far as an across-the-board increase for employees. But again, it's probably something in line with that 4% increase.
So we have 16 people that are below the pledged living wage,
That's correct.
Correct.
but we have 181 people that are below, if we were looking at the living wage, 45,918.
That's correct.
And we
And
don't-
we've talked about also the compression that.
Well, but let me
that
ask
doesn't
this
include
question. So
compression.
like, let's say we do a 5% across the board, I'm just hypothetically. We do a 5% across the board pay raise for all employees. Do we know what number of the people in the 181 would get lifted above the living wage threshold? Like, do we have an idea of what would be remaining?
I think we could easily figure that out, but I don't, off the top of my
You
head.
don't, yeah, no, and that's fine, I'm just,
If we're putting another thing on the menu, which would be finding out how many folks would come out of that 181, I still would love, I'm at least one person who would love to know if we looked at the median and then took that single number amount and instead of doing a percentage, I imagine it's probably like between 3,000 and 4,000. Because we all pay more at the grocery store and the gas tank, regardless of whether we're renters or homeowners across the spectrum of wages in City Hall. If we did a flat rate instead of a percentage rate, could we reduce compression and get more people out of the 181 this year by doing a fixed
Are you
dollar
saying a
amount
lump
instead of a
sum?
percentage? Correct, a lump sum.
Yeah, I think that would, from the compression impact of that, I would probably want to check with our HR professionals to see what their feedback would be on that. But we could certainly figure out from a dollar impact what that would be, what that would cost.
I think tried to mention that in the retreat, and hopefully that's clear, but like another item on the menu that says, or we could do a fixed rate, and seeing the budget impact between a percentage and a fixed rate would really help.
and
Yeah, I don't know the fixed
so
rate.
do you, when you say fixed rate, say more about that.
So let's say that someone's making, I'm just gonna pick one of these off the list, 45,923, salary exempt, and they make a $4,000 fixed rate increase, and the person in the next pay grade above them also has a $4,000 increase.
Okay.
Everyone's getting a bonus. Everyone's getting more resources to pay for groceries and transportation, childcare.
But
But
not
we're
one
not-
time, it's a permanent salary
It's a
increase.
permanent salary
Yeah.
increase, but if the percentage seems to be, to me, what's making it cost prohibitive to get us the 181 out of
And-
poverty.
Okay, okay.
Well,
That's,
I
so it'd just be
think-
interesting to see the numbers on something
Yeah.
like that. I don't
Well, and the
have, I don't.
alternative is how we have been doing it. The challenge with that, I mean, I just came from talking with a bunch of staff, and we're struggling to hire leadership positions too, right? And so our compression of leadership functions and management functions is really struggling as well. And so that which is a compression, is a sign of compression challenges. So compression's pretty, needs to be baked into how we're analyzing this information, because that really, it's just a red flag for the system to really start having struggles functioning.
We're also gonna have a really hard time hiring people in management positions if they're expected to manage departments with high vacancies like Public Works.
So,
Public
one,
Works doesn't have super high vacancies, though.
Anymore?
Yeah, like, just talked to them today, they're doing pretty well.
well.
I still like to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would be, and I think what you're hearing from us is us trying to figure out how to solve the math problems because we want to pay people more. So,
We do too.
yeah, so I mean, I think, if you all are like, oh, that's not the way you do it, you do it this way, if that's what your goal is. I mean, I'm open to hearing whatever the suggestions are. One thing that's still kind of driving me crazy is when I look at other cities, and I have, and I know you all have, and you go and look at their websites for their firefighters or for their police officers, they sell it really clear. They say, like, entry-level police officer makes $55,000. If you have a bachelor's degree, it's $5,000 more. If you have whatever certification, it's $3,000 more. Ours is like, you get this percentage, and it's $1,572.60, and our starting pay is this, so I would also, and we've talked about this before, I would also like to see HR aggressively adapt our first responder positions, and maybe it's true in Public Works and other, I don't even know, but to match the way these other cities are advertising these positions, and so that if I'm looking for a job, I'm trying to do my apples to apples, and it works that way if I'm looking at Charlotte, if I'm looking at Greensboro, but when I get to the city of Asheville, I'm like, I have to spend a little more time trying to figure it out, and it doesn't really jump out at me. So that's kind of more of a
Sure.
packaging
And-
issue in addition
absolutely,
to
Mayor.
pay. And so it seems we're
No,
overdue
I-
for that correction.
I think you are right, and I'm not sure if you are checking the APD website, because that's where a lot of our social media marketing and recruitment things are housed, but I will make sure that we make that.
Well, and
that transfer of
as mayor, when I run around and give the state of the city, I have slides that talk about what our officers make and then what additional pay they receive for their various
Right.
accreditations. And so I can see that it's this kind of, down to the dollar sort of math. But I'm just saying in my experience, when I'm looking at these other cities and how they're packaging it, they're paying, some are paying more, lots of folks are paying more,
Absolutely.
and there's lots of different issues going on there. I'm not necessarily addressing that, although we do need to address that, but I'm also just thinking about, okay, and then if we get to that dollar figure that we're happy with, how are we putting that together so people who are looking for a job can make sense of it?
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing clearly is you all are definitely interested in providing some, whether it's percentage, whether it's a dollar figure, you're gonna give us a raise this year. Is that what? You're interested in us pursuing an adjustment in compensation. We'll have to figure out what that amount is or will be in the math, such that we minimize impact on compression, because that obviously increases the overall amount. And it impacts morale.
The compression issue.
Absolutely, the compression issue does. And I'm surprised you didn't hear that at Public Works, because I hear it.
What I heard
A
at
lot.
Public Works is that they are exhausted. It was
I know.
near tear provoking. I mean, they're just working so hard, and they love their work, and they are completely out of energy.
Yep.
So I have to bring this up, but the salaried exempt at 45,923 at the full-time schedule of 40 hours a week breaks down to 2207 an hour, but the firefighter base pay based on their different scheduling works out to 1710 an hour. So once again, having those side by side is a little tricky.
Yeah, a little tricky, and they're on different pay plans, so that also.
It looks like more, but
Yeah.
it's less per hour. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Can I ask a question around, I feel like every year we have this conversation around living wage and bringing employees up to a living wage pay. And, and if we were to say, oh, show me the math about what it would cost to pay every employee a living wage, the $45,918, usually what we hear is, well, we can't really do that because it would take us literally a whole year to figure out the compression issue. I mean, do you feel like, I know you've made some changes in HR and you've got some folks in there that you feel pretty good about examining these issues. I mean, do you, and in years past, when we have made kind of, because you can see percentage-wise, we've been trying to move people up in the last couple of years, we'll hear after the fact, well, I didn't get the raise I thought, everyone was supposed to get this amount, and I didn't get it, and we're still waiting to hear from HR about this, that, and the other thing. I mean, are we, because what I'd like to say to you is show me what it looks like to pay everyone a living wage and deal with the compression and come back in 2 weeks and let's see the number. But are you gonna say to me, well, it's really gonna be difficult to do and we can't figure that out?
No, I'm not going to say that to you at all.
Okay.
What I will say is, it's going to be expensive.
Yeah, no, and
However,
yes.
We will do the math, and.
Well, and if council's interested in seeing that number, I'm just one person. I just want to see if we, if you feel like we can look at that number. Now, it may come back and the number is, beyond any revenue potential we have without drastically raising taxes. And I'm prepared to look at that and figure out what that means. But I mean, I think we're eager to kind of get ready and do some math and slice and dice it. If it's a living wage increase dealing with compression, and that looks equitable, I mean, I want to see what that number is. If it's raise everyone by a certain dollar value across the board, so if you make, 6 figures, you get $4,000 versus if you make $45,000, you get $4,000. So there's equity in that in theory. Or also staff has weighed in on these department head positions we have some vacancies and are difficult to hire. I mean, it's the manager's budget. I would like to see what the proposal is, but from my perspective, I want to be as aggressive as we can in terms of paying employees.
Absolutely. And the only thing that I would say is obviously the living wage changes every year. And so I can say we can do this year, but then
Sure.
for future years,
Right.
I'm
Agreed.
just saying, if we
We're
want to
always
get there
chasing
this year, it will be for 1 year.
Unless we magically solve affordable housing, we'll be chasing it.
You got it.
So I'd be curious to know if there are, what the variables are in the compression analysis. If
Sure.
just how you were getting to those figures, or some examples would be helpful. Not necessarily
Taylor,
now,
do
but in
we-
follow-up.
We don't have them in
We didn't
this
include those.
presentation, but
We
yeah,
took
we
them
can-
out. We're sorry.
Yeah, but in the future, I just mean going
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
We can definitely do that, because in policy and finance and HR, we did provide examples of, and this is how compression impacts, say, a supervisor in public works. And
Could we also get some updates on vacancies by department?
absolutely.
And maybe a little history there that tells the story of whether or not these wage increases are even helping.
History is honestly a bit
Little
more
hard.
challenging.
Maybe these last few years. the
Because of
vacancy
the
rates.
like snapshot nature of it, so it's
Yeah.
like if we didn't take the snapshot, it's.
At the same time.
At the comparable. Mhm.
Maybe we should get snapshots at the same time going forward.
I think that's something that we're hoping our new HRIS system will help us do.
We're getting the infrastructure to do these kinds of analysis. We're
Yeah.
not there yet,
That makes
but
sense.
we are on our way.
Okay.
But we could undoubtedly, again, it would be whenever, like, you all have requested that information in the past, we could kind of look at what we provided then and then give you all an update just to see what those changes look like. That would be, we could definitely do that.
I have a curiosity around this too, and it's bigger picture than this budget year, but I'd be interested in seeing like really creative ideas. Like, we're gonna have this conversation every year, is what I'm feeling, right? And we've been having it, some years it's harder to make the math work, some years it's easier. But what are some like out-of-the-box things that we do to chase this and make different changes? Are we, I'm not an HR professional, but is it really just as simple as raise your rates over time and keep paying people more? I understand that there's system things like our affordable housing approach is, it's part of a whole system, it's part of the wages, but I'd be curious as we kind of go into a new phase of our HR department, like what's the big picture, long range, so that we might make plays in the short term so that we are improving the annual conversation that we have to have around this. I don't have an answer, and it might not be that, it might just be obvious, we need more money. That's probably what it is, but I'd be curious to look longer range, bigger picture, creative ideas. What does that mean?
Well, we definitely always need more money, but I
Yes.
don't know necessarily, compensation is always the biggest challenge for local government. It's not only that we are competing against other local governments for talent, but we're also competing against the private sector. That's why we do these studies that identify, the value of each one of our jobs in the marketplace. And unfortunately, that consistently changes. It goes up almost every year. And it literally is a rabbit that you chase. I mean, I'm serious. I've got a couple of years in this profession, and it is just it's a struggle, and it is something that you grapple with, unfortunately, on an annual basis. The other piece of the compensation philosophy potentially is still got to have money. There's still going to be a percent increase, but we believe strongly best practice is a merit-based pay. So it's pay for performance. The highest performers get the most significant increases in pay. But that is going to take us a couple of more years to build that foundation as well. So there's
not for next year.
Not for next year, and definitely not for next year. But we will bring back, I'm just going to summarize, we will bring back the total cost, and again, Mayor, we'll just do it for this year. If we were to increase to a living wage rate, we will bring back additional information about vacancies, and we'll try to find a comparable date in the past to where we are now. And we will look at percentage increases and as Ms. Roney has said, a flat rate or a dollar allocation versus a percent allocation. So we'll bring back several compensation options. We'll also bring back a little bit of information about, and I say little because I just don't know that there's a silver bullet out there in terms of compensation, but we will look at some other communities and see how they are addressing or approaching compensation.
And when you mentioned about just needing more money, it made me think of a question I probably should have asked at the beginning. When you did the survey results and you mentioned the things that people most wanted, did people say anything that they just hate that we do? That they wish we never did it again? I'm thinking in terms of cuts.
We didn't ask that question.
Because what if people hate one of our priorities?
I will say, interestingly, we did ask a question that's maybe not exactly getting at this, but I think, one of the, it's that question of like, everything's trade-offs, right? Whether that's on the expense side or the revenue side. So we didn't ask, what would you cut? But we did ask, would you pay more, specifically related to water, because we knew that we were recommending, for some rate classes, which we'll get to later, some significant changes to our water rates. And so the question was, and I'm not exactly sure of the wording, but essentially like, are you willing to pay higher water rates for us to invest in the service? And perhaps a bit surprisingly, I'm pretty sure that the answers to that were, the majority of folks said yes. So I think that's something that we don't often go to. I think, whether it's making a hard decision to stop doing something or making a hard decision to, increase the cost of our services, whether that's through property taxes or fees. But yeah, we'll add that on the list of things to consider for our next budget survey. What would you?
Or was there an order, order of prioritization? Does that translate into department funding?
Well, because they are an enterprise fund, we will.
Well, not water, just overall.
Just overall. If we had more information.
Yeah, I mean, I
We could
think.
do an assessment or analysis, and based on what your council's priorities are, we could translate that.
Yeah, I think that's work that would take some time to really dig into, to say like, what does reduction in a service look like operationally? Again, partly because with personnel being the largest piece of our budget, we don't generally, and I'm not going to speak for anyone, but I think are unlikely to do reductions in our personnel piece, right, in our staffing. So it would be, trying to figure out, can we reallocate those people resources to another service, which to the point doesn't ultimately save us any money. So it's something that, an interesting thing to certainly consider, and I think something that we don't talk about a lot because it's difficult to truly reduce service.
That was a great segue to my question as well. When it comes to these surveys, and asking them, similar to the water, have we ever surveyed, or have you ever surveyed your staff around the importance of the living wages to them, or, a question of, are you willing to see less of a raise so that those experiencing the lowest raises can be lifted? Has any of that kind of survey or discourse happened?
We have done some engagement, not in the current year, but in the last couple with employees. Again, never asked that question directly. Essentially, I think, to paraphrase, like, would you be willing to take a lower raise to kind of raise the bottom
To
line?
raise the whole organization's lower, yeah. It's a curious thing. I have worked for a company that took that approach and was surprised to find that the answer was yes. But I'm just curious if you had done that. I think from our perspective, it's not an easy decision for us. We're trying to look at this knowing that there's a dire need for wages across the city, across all positions, and, remaining competitive with larger cities that are paying just as much. But I do wonder how we're going to help those 181 people.
And one final thing I do want to mention, because I think it's important, is we certainly don't have a policy of doing kind of across the board raises, but that is the practice that we've utilized more often than not over at least the time that I've been with the city. And so as we're thinking about kind of getting back to this philosophy and balancing these trade-offs, and making, looking at some other opportunities to invest in employees in a different way, doing it at this point in the budget process, when potentially it's going to impact employees July 1, is a little bit of a challenge for us organizationally, because we want to be able to get out in front of that and let folks know, our employees know, right? Like, if we're going to say, you may have been expecting an across the board increase, but we're going to do something drastically different. We want to be able to have that conversation internally as well.
Well, and I think that's what I'm hearing when we ask for this flat rate view.
Yeah.
What's that look like?
So just an additional challenge.
We'll always have those.
Undoubtedly. All right, so to kind of summarize on this new investment piece, again, as I said, limited capacity for new investments. We are focusing on compensation and looking to make enhancements where we have the funding available to do so. Any-
And in addition to compensation, again, I know that we always hear, well, you can't pay the rent, with benefits, but we have to realize we also offer benefits that cost a significant amount of money. And in some of the new orientations, when I'm communicating with employees, they appreciate the benefits too. So again, we have to balance
And this
wages
is new,
and
right?
benefits.
Yeah, this is a new thing in the last few years because the Living Wage Just Economics Program included those in the value of the wage. And it brings up a question I asked last time we budgeted. Are other cities using other living wage models? Is there another model out there? I mean, not to, put aside our own local living wage model that I think is one of the strongest in the
There are
nation,
some out
but
there.
what are other cities doing?
There are certainly other ways to calculate a living wage. When we did some look to see what other cities in North Carolina were specifically tying their compensation decisions to a living wage, there were, I don't recall, but if there were any, it was very few.
Yeah, I think MIT has one or something, but it's about household size and stuff, and that just gets wild.
Yeah, usually it's a cost of living index that's national.
Plus the benefits, though.
Yeah.
So, any other questions on new investments?
Yeah, I had a question. I really appreciate the conversation today around wage and compensation, but I had a different question that just kind of like floated through there, and it was around community responders. So I really appreciate that we're working towards sending the right person with the right tool and training during times of crisis. And I wonder if we've done a cost comparison of what it looks like instead of creating our own department in response to grow the community paramedics response by partnering with the county. Would it make our opioid dollars go farther? So a couple of things to pack into that conversation would be appreciation for our new fire chief. I appreciate Deborah's vision on the community responders, and I'm not suggesting that we don't do it. It would just help me understand while we're piloting this program if we're actually duplicating costs, and then also what's the cost of pulling our staff off of trucks?
Sure. And definitely we will have that information. It has been interesting with the evolution of the community responders initiative. It literally started out with a conversation in Public Safety Committee in terms of understanding were we being proactive enough or reactive? And the way that I would distinguish Community Paramedics Initiative and what we're doing is we're being a lot more proactive. They're not competing, they're complementing their efforts. And so I will, when we come back with more detailed recommendations, we will break down, what it is and has cost us in terms of this interim transition period. But out of all of the things in terms of services that we have been doing, particularly in response to some of the public safety and community crises that we're having related to the unhoused, this is the program that everyone points to as the most effective and impactful. And I'm pretty proud that we started it.
I am too, and I'm grateful. The part that is still a gap for me is the behavioral health crisis. So we have behavioral health crisis, opioid crisis, and homelessness. And I hear that community responder is a way to be proactive around homelessness. And yet, the needs we have around our behavioral health crisis are so profound that it requires someone uniquely qualified to address behavioral health crises. And so if we put our firefighters and our community responders in a situation where we still have a gap, then we're failing both our staff and the person who's having the crisis. So it would help me to understand from a cost analysis, but also like not just the dollar cost, but the social and staffing cost.
And we have gotten our community responders some training. That's why we're trying to partner them with some peer support workers so that we can address holistically an individual's issues when they're in crisis.
Thank you.
And on the funding piece specifically, we can certainly bring back some more detailed information on what that's, what we would estimate the cost to be in the current year.
Are we ready to, I just want to kind of make sure we're summarizing the direction on this
Yes.
piece of it. It sounds like there's strong interest in, yes, raising wages, looking to you for guidance on how we can, what levels, what the math looks like, what are our options there, with as aggressive as possible, keeping, I think for you, in terms of you looking at the options.
Yes, ma'am.
So
We'll bring back
is
that
that, am I
information.
capturing that? So more to come later, we're gonna look at some
April
numbers and
9th.
see some options.
All right, so we'll move on to our general capital outlook and GeoBond planning. Again, you all have seen this slide before. We need some additional investments in our facilities and infrastructure to maintain current levels of service. We have aging infrastructure, deferred maintenance, and as a result, substantial needs. And our current capital funding is not sufficient for us to address those needs. Luckily, we do have a lot of information to help us inform decisions. You all have heard about the top part of this list from Walter Ear in our Capital Projects Department about the facilities condition assessment and master planning. You all have adopted the GAP plan, and we have ongoing work again around the Recreate Asheville plan and the Affordable Housing Plan, which will help inform our priorities and where we need to make investments. And again, we have this opportunity with the GeoBond referenda to help address some of these needs and give us some additional capacity. So we always hesitate to put this list out there. You can see there's not a total. So
I totaled it. It's a lot. This is $750 million.
We knew you'd do that.
through our, yeah, it's not hard math to do, but through our internal work, these are the needs, the projects that we've identified that need to be funded, that would be funded through our general capital projects. So this does not include water, parking, stormwater. It does include transit because those are funded through general funds. So fleet and equipment, again, as you see, buses there. And we just tried to give some examples of what are in these different categories. And this is the way that we kind of categorize our our general capital plan in the budget document. So facilities, it includes some significant facilities like a new transit garage, art place, the Parkside development. Again, Walter talked about that in the master planning portion in the fall. Fleet and equipment, again, our general fleet and IT replacement, also AFD apparatus, which are pretty pricey, and bus replacements, our GAP plan, top 10 priorities for greenways. The big number in the Parks, Recreation, and Entertainment section is the Thomas Wolfe at, I think, $200 million. Some placemaking, again, some items that you all have already seen and approved, including the I-26 enhancements and Cox Avenue project that's been in our CIP, kind of slowly made its way closer and closer to reality. And then our streets and sidewalks, which includes street resurfacing, sidewalk maintenance, ADA improvements, and items like that. So again, we've done a lot of work with departments to try to identify these needs, and now what we got to do is figure out how to fund them.
Just curious if the Parks, Rec, and Entertainment includes anything around Malvern Pool?
So it does include some investments in aquatics. Again, I think we would be looking to the Recreate Asheville plan
Planning
to
and
really
the-
give us kind of a guide, those investments. But we do, so it's kind of that's one where we don't have a specific, but we know we need some investments in our aquatics facilities broadly, whether that's Rec Park Pool or other places across the city. So an update on our internal planning. We're hoping to have our kind of internal draft of our capital improvement program finalized next week. And we've been working through this year to do that, really kind of put everything together, whether that's what I call our regular capital program, again, our 5-year CIP that you all see every year, as well as our GO bond planning. And the reason that we did that is, at the end of the day, whether it's funded through a general obligation bond or our, regular LOBS program or a federal grant or TDA, our priorities as a city that we've established should be kind of our guiding principles for whatever the funding is. So, we really want to use that funding to kind of maximize what we're able to do, but not let the funding steer our priorities, if that makes sense. So that's where we're at right now. Again, we're kind of wrapping that work up next week. And then at the next work session, we'll have some more details around amounts by referenda categories, which we'll get to in a minute. And then also a little more detail about what types of projects would be in those categories.
And Taylor, can you talk a little bit about our horizon? We've kind of
So
extended.
I'm going to use that to segue a little bit
Sure.
into the steady state. So we've shown you all this, these kind of 3 options before. What we're recommending today is that we move forward planning around this kind of 2 votes of around $75 million each, one in November of this year and then one in 2028. And to the city manager's comment, part of that is kind of extending our planning horizon out a bit. So as I said, you all hopefully are familiar with our 5-year CIP. We've tried to stretch that planning out to a 10-year time horizon, and part of that is we generally have, not generally, state statute, I guess, we have around 7 years to spend that general obligation bond money. So if we're just looking at a 5-year cycle, that doesn't really capture the full 7-year, much less that 2028 7-year time horizon. So we're really just trying to stretch what we have. That's presented an opportunity and a challenge for us as well. Asking folks for additional information and to be thinking really far out in advance. But I think it will result in a better product and better planning for us. As again, you may also recall one of Walter's slides that I think he's shown repeatedly is this planning cycle for some of these big investments, whether that's a new transit garage or any, or the Parkside development that we really, it takes 7 years, I think is the window. I hope Walter's not shaking his fist at me right now that I've messed that up. When we kind of initiate an idea of something like that to get through the planning, get through the engineering, before we ever actually start to build a new facility. So we gotta start thinking in this longer term time horizon to execute on some of these needs that we have. So again, the steady state voting cycle is really this idea of getting on a more consistent GO bond referenda cycle that helps us do this long-term planning. It shaves off some of those peaks and valleys in our debt resources so we can kind of have that be a little more steady number. It improves our ability to do resource allocation, gives you all a better sense of where we're headed and what the resources are needed. And again, it just gets us, I think, into a place where we can be more consistent with our planning and again, start to address some of these significant needs that we've identified.
So this only other major bond we've ever done, the 2016 bond, was sort of a learning experience, obviously. And it seemed like we probably could have had twice the amount of money in Parks and Rec and been able to knock it out. But oddly, we kind of struggled with the affordable housing piece because so many times you'd fund something and the project wouldn't go, the developer couldn't put it together, they'd give us the money back, or just the time it takes to do our own properties. So I get the kind of balance between what's the cost to taxpayers and then also kind of what can we just actually handle in terms of putting in place. So I wonder, I'm very eager to you know, the bonds passed overwhelmingly last time. I don't have any reason to believe that folks wouldn't be supportive. I know, I'm hopeful the chamber will, again, help us with advertising it and getting people behind it. But what if we did, I mean, and you don't have to answer this right now, but I mean, what if we did 100 million in this package and then rolled into a 75 million every 2 years? Is it, I just, I don't want to like lose an opportunity because it's such a big lift to put it together, but I totally agree. We've got to get on the steady state or whatever we're calling it every 2 years. So anyway, I don't know, I see, it's very interesting to see the numbers and how it impacts taxpayers and how it makes a lot of sense the way it's being proposed. I'm just curious what not instead of 150, what it looks like if we
We'll do that
did 100.
assessment, absolutely.
And Mayor, are you saying that you prefer every 2 years? Because
This is 4. Yes, we
I
have to
think
do
you're
4.
signaling with this highlighted bar that you're signaling maybe a staff direction towards one, for financial capacity, but also for ability to deliver.
Yeah.
Because that's on my mind too. I know that, thanks for providing some input on the sidewalk in Haw Creek. And when you read the timeline of why it's taken this long, it makes a lot of sense, especially transportation projects, getting land access. Like, some of these big projects are difficult, or Mayor, as you're mentioning, money doesn't just solve the affordable housing thing. There's a lot of nuance to the parcels and the property and who gives money back. And so I'm sensitive to, as our great leader Deborah would say, under-promising and over-delivering. And I do have that hesitation of a 2-year cycle. But then I also wonder if that just means we scale up the staffing capacity and it's just more business as usual. So I kind of feel torn and still processing between a 4-year or 2-year cycle.
Same, yeah.
And I
Part of
hear
that also is financial capacity
Undoubtedly.
to, yeah,
And I think,
Tell me
to
more.
afford it, to be able to afford a 2-year.
You mean the impact to taxpayers?
Right.
So why don't we look
Right,
at,
yeah.
I mean, let's just see what
Yeah.
that looks like if you
Yeah,
You-
I hear that.
you did 50 million every 2 years, or you did, I don't know, I'd be kind of curious to see what the impact is to taxpayers, because, you know, that's obviously, we've got to be cognizant of that. I just don't know what those numbers look like. I know a lot of cities do run them every 2 years, so since I'm looking around seeing other cities do that,
My community.
I know partly it's because they're rolling off debt while they're rolling on new debt, and they're not, it's a net.
Because they have a
Nothing.
cycle, and we don't have a cycle.
Right,
yet.
Right, we
Yeah.
haven't
We
been
have
on a cycle.
we need
That's
a
why they were able to
cycle.
So, but we will be, we
We
will
will-
be
gonna
eventually,
get there.
because we'll be
We're getting
retiring.
We're getting there,
We're gonna
yeah.
get there.
But it's a long on-ramp, I get that, so, I mean, it may be that the on-ramp's too long, but I'd like to see what it looks like, just to,
Yeah.
And I haven't heard any numbers really thrown out for the different categories, like how much we might do for affordable housing. But I want to follow up on something Mayor said, because, the way that since our 2016 was kind of this new adventure, we hadn't had a lot of experience with it. What we did with the affordable housing bonds, which was 25 million, was take a huge chunk of it and put it into our own care. Like, we went out and did research, we hired firms to learn how we should develop land, we tried to do it ourselves. And then as we closed in on the timeline, we said, you know what, we can't do all this ourselves. I think we would have better, quicker results in affordable housing if we skipped those few years of trying to be developers. And I just say that because I want us to go big on affordable housing. I haven't heard that number, but I don't want us to shy away from it because we had a slow start this last round. I think that we could actually be hugely impactful if we're deliberate. And it shows in our recent years. I just don't want to leave us with that perception that it took a long time or might not be able to do as much if we did 25 million again. I know that we can.
So the reason that we have not kind of allocated resources is we had a couple of steps ahead of us. Number
you want to
one,
look at.
Sure.
tell us how much.
Sure, I just
How
want to
much
put
we're
an
dealing
early
with.
plug in for the affordable housing.
How much we're dealing with, as well as
Deploying
confirming the
it.
categories.
Mhm.
And then thirdly, it is reviewing a 2-year and financial impact and capacity from
Mhm.
internal staff being able to deliver the projects.
Yeah, it seems,
versus a 4-year.
my sense is the 2-year is
That
going to be more of a
recommendation.
capacity issue. It might be better for us in the long run, but I think to the on-ramp point and the capacity, it's
might
going to
be
be
a little-
hard. But I would like to see the math. And I'd really like to use it as an educational opportunity towards what's coming in the future. Like maybe not this body, but this is the direction we're going to have to go to get on top of all this deferred maintenance for decades and decades. So even if we don't choose to go every 2 years, it would be helpful to the community to understand what that looks like.
I'm a little
Absolutely.
concerned that we're talking about this in a silo. And I would prefer to go with the 3 votes every 2 years, because we're talking about a trifecta of raises of taxes at the same time, but we're only talking about them one at a time. So later tonight, we're gonna talk about the business improvement district, and then the county's also doing a reval. So one of the biggest concerns I heard from the stakeholder meetings with the business improvement district was, we're gonna raise property taxes downtown, which is gonna impact commercial and residents. And you shouldn't raise taxes on us again for 10 years. And I was like, well, we're actually talking about raising taxes now, and the county is. So if we're not kind of zooming out and seeing the trifecta, then, and we stack it too heavy on the front end, the voters might not approve the bond. And so I think if we can talk really honestly about what we're asking folks to do, in addition to what the outcome, the desired outcome is, I think we have a better chance of investing in our community the way our community expects us to.
And from our assessment, and the reason that we went with the 2 at 75 is if you can see the difference between the impact on the property owner
Yeah.
when you do 3 years at 50 and 3
Right.
times.
3 times.
Every 2 years.
Those are all 4-year intervals, I assume.
Right.
The
No, the 3
3
one
is
is
every
every
two.
2 years.
Yeah, but
Oh,
one of,
okay.
one of the reasons why I would suggest the 3
You
and
just don't have
doing it
enough
on
money.
every ballot is that people are in a habit of
Yep.
voting on investment in our neighborhood and climate infrastructure
Yep.
every time they vote. If it's only every 4 years, then we have to really make a case every 4 years.
So just to clarify that, if you'll go to the next slide, so it's the
This one?
150 is a one-time shot, the 75 are at 4-year intervals, and the 50's at 2-year
2
intervals.
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, it would be hard for this city to, I mean, it seems like money is money, and there's that you got it within 6 years versus, I don't know, I mean, I like the idea of it being a regular thing, I mean, so I think, I don't have strong.
I'm also
feelings.
watching the bonds dashboard, and if we're keeping up to date with the bonds dashboard, we still got some money to spend
Yeah.
and quick.
That's why I say capacity,
That's what I
yeah.
said, we
We're
have
just
to
not
do it
fully staffed, we're not
quick.
fully there to be able to deploy it, even though it probably is more ideal to have it on the ballot every 2 years.
I think, listening to staff talk who have experience with cities that have a really robust bond program, they kind of build out a department that's just constantly handling
Yeah.
and we've kind of moved in that direction with the
Capital projects.
capital projects department, and so, and again, some of the stuff we do really well, the infrastructure stuff that's way in our wheelhouse around, Parks and Rec and some of the transportation, we stumble when it comes to having to do condemnation for right-of-way, for sidewalks, that seems to be, and when we're coupling it with federal highway funds, I'm seeing long delays in our
And it's a DOT
process. Yeah, so, and that, that's frustrating, and some of that maybe we can tighten up as we get better at it, and some of it may be unavoidable.
And that's the
totally-
only thing that I want us to remember, that this is new. We have not been on this regular cycle, and I know we want to be aggressive, and what you are hearing from staff is we are trying to be as aggressive as possible while we are building the infrastructure for us to implement. And who knows, after 2028, you may be able to go to
Right.
a every 2-year cycle, because we built a lot of muscle in order to engage in this. But we will do the analysis, we'll come back with at least the financial assessment analysis in terms of the impact. We will have to probably go to our consultants to help do some modeling
Where-
for us.
Where does the 150 come from? Based on, we
Borrowing.
did 75 last time, based on all the things we dream of, like, where's the
Be borrowing.
150?
As a total.
Is it our debt capacity, like, where, yeah.
Yeah, it's a combination. I think it's a little bit of like, what do we think we can, deliver on within a certain
Okay.
amount of time. I think it's certainly, there is a piece which is important to think about where we are ramping up our debt per capita relatively quickly. So like trying to stretch that
Fundraising,
out helps
yeah.
us maintain some capacity in the future. Again, it's like, I think the idea of that on-ramp being perhaps a bit longer than we would otherwise want it to be, to make sure that we're not taking on a bunch of debt really quickly.
So it's not necessarily
Because we
like
got
a list
that
of projects that added up to 150? It's
No,
just,
no.
okay.
We certainly have more than $150 million of needs. And I think
No, you saw that.
Yeah, I saw.
The-
Well, the Thomas Wolfe, but yeah.
yeah.
I guess I'm just wondering, if this is the only thing you're putting forward, 150 or 75, 75, 50, 50, 50, as opposed to like 100 and
Well, that's what I was
75,
asking.
yeah.
If we
That's
could
what
just
she's-
see what
Yeah,
those look like.
okay.
The mayor's asking. And
And
we'll bring that
Gotcha.
back again with our financial
Yeah.
assessment and
Okay.
analysis in terms of our risk and the LGC's ability to approve.
Right.
Because we will have to go through an approval process.
And I think
with the
that
state.
that's a big part of how we landed kind of in the middle ground, which is we feel like it's a good balance between, getting a significant amount on the front end, right? Like going for 75 million, we feel confident that we can execute on that. Giving ourselves 4 years to get through that before we layer on another 75 million, show the community
lot.
that we've been able to execute, made
Yeah.
forward progress. That might be a little more challenging, right, with a 2-year window. And then also, again, kind of going back to this affordability, there's minor but, additional costs related to, having to do those issuances repeatedly. There's, at the end of the day, I think we felt like the financial impact, you don't really like get much for doing 350. Like the difference in cost is, I would argue, pretty negligible if we're talking about $4 a year for the average property tax value. Whereas like the 150, is a little more costly, a little more impactful. So trying to balance all of those things simultaneously is kind of landing in the center of.
One last question for you. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, this conversation is helping me kind of see where y'all were starting with kind of the recommendation on the every 4 years to start. And I just want to make sure that we can deliver. I want to make sure we're ambitious with meeting our needs and replacing the infrastructure we need. And I think, I think I lean more towards that every 4 years, want to see these combinations, but then moving towards that over time. The
Right.
other thing to consider is at some point, tax increases are necessary. So if we get to an every 2 years, then it's every 2 years and tax increases. So this could have some cycling for different revenue approaches. The two other things I just want to say is, like, of course, we're having this context, this is about the bond, but, we have been having a program with the county where we help people with property taxes. That's still very important, and making sure that we're scaling that up so that the least of us have options as their bills go up, I think is important. And just going back to an earlier pie chart of what is our intergovernmental money percentage, 8%. I would like to see that go to 20% with federal and state money coming towards us. So I think that, I just want to to me, it's helpful. Those are in my head and I want to have them out, that yes, I'm looking at more revenue here, and we are, but I think that there's other strategies for us to have a healthier, more financially sustainable model.
And we're going to have to build trust along the way if we want voters to keep supporting it. So those outcomes really matter. My question is, if I'm, where in your planning process, Deborah and Taylor and Tony, you can't be here, do I say, hey, I want to make sure that Malvern Hills is in this bond package? Like, so the Parks and Rec has just launched their input, but what is the timeline on, are we going to know anything about that before we have to vote on this? I mean, I want to support bonds, but I want to make sure Malvern Hills
So
is in
here's
there.
some, I mean,
It's just kind of
Malvern
broad.
There's a bunch of
Is there an
different
avenue coming that we might know more?
so we should probably give some direction about that, because you can kind of create a list, and I'll just share, the
Right.
last time we did it, we tried to create a list that showed geographic, that
Investment.
dispersed geographically throughout the city, so everyone could kind of see okay, there's gonna be these projects in these various parts of the city, maybe we wanna take that approach. Again, I don't know, but also knowing it is somewhat fluid, because sometimes things happen. Once you get in, you realize one project is qualified for matching funds, and so it kind of shoots to the top of the list, and so what would you think would
Well, I
be the
get that
best
it's
way?
complicated. I just don't know what the timeline is on the parks and input and.
Sure. We will be bringing the Parks Master Plan through Environment and Public Safety. And at that time, there will be recommendations around aquatics investments. And that plan has to be adopted by full council, though. That could be a time where you all have input on a specific project. And then we can take that information as we are developing specific projects related to the GO bond and include those.
What's that timeline? This summer, this fall, this?
This will be, I think, May. We should have preliminary recommendations from the Asheville plan.
Well, that's helpful. Okay.
Enough to at least begin this conversation to fold it into the budget process.
That helps a lot. Okay.
Hopefully, because
Yeah,
the
things,
manager's budget is May 14th, something like that.
I have a different question about Malvern Hills Park, or Park and Pool. When I look at the bonds dashboard and I take out everything but Parks and Rec and I turn on the include only bond projects, it says the total budget that we budgeted was 26.1 million, 3.7 million are under contract, and we've only spent 21.1, but we need to spend it down this year. And so I went through and looked to see what we've spent, what's under budget, and if this is up to date, what I'm seeing is we need to spend funds this year. Why aren't we spending these funds on Malvern Hills Park?
I'm not sure that's accurate. I looked at that too. I wonder if staff could, because we did promise we were gonna keep that dashboard up to date. And that was one of the commitments we made in 2016 because of this question of, you better show us transparency and we
Right.
wanna hold you accountable on all the projects you said you were gonna do. But I wondered if Rachel or whoever's kind of Ben or whoever's overseeing this could tell us what is remaining of the bond funds from 2016, if any, and are they earmarked for something already, or are they totally unallocated? I
For
suspect.
example, Carrier Park Playground budgeted $500,000. Now, this is when you turn on the not debt bond ones. Under contract 0, spent 767. If that's not at all attached to our bonds, that would help to know. But it looks like we have dollars that we need to spend.
perhaps a last updated
We-
on this
We will
date field.
definitely
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
that to you all. We're going to have a whole lot of information to bring back to you at our April 9th work session, unless you want it sooner.
Well, I think what I don't know about you all, but what I would ask of management would be a suggestion around the bond package. I like the 4 category, I think it was 4.
Can you
Yeah,
go
I do
back
too.
to?
The
yes.
4 categories identified, I mean, those make sense to me. And what that looks like under these different scenarios, a 75-75, a 50-50-50, a 100-75, whatever. And, I think you can't identify each and every, because some projects are
Sure.
quite small, but you can kind of get high level in terms of, last time we identified New Leicester Highway sidewalk, Hawk Creek High sidewalk. We had some pretty big chunky stuff we were able to say would be included. So, I don't know, something like that based on the analysis you all have done. And we've, obviously been on the tour. We've seen the needs, so we'll know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
We'll do it, and toward the end of his presentation, that's exactly the kind of guidance and direction that we were.
And just one, I don't know
asking for.
what council, if you have different feelings about how you want to work through this process, but that's kind of what I would look toward.
I think these 4 really speak to the wide range of core services and infrastructure we've been talking about and our strategic priorities. So I really like these buckets, and similarly understand we're not going to negotiate a list down to the final project, but we need to have a sketch of what we expect and some projects that we know are really specifically necessary, might sift up in that process. So
So when we see transportation, we're not seeing transit or buses under there.
Correct.
Okay.
Why not?
Well, we had fleet in capital,
So that's
So
elsewhere.
we fund fleet through our normal,
Right.
our
so
regular
not through bonds.
capital.
Yes, they
Yeah,
have
we,
to be through
we would
GO.
not want to issue long-term debt for buses.
Yeah,
um,
depreciating
Because the
painful
asset.
assets that sometimes can't make turns. Yeah.
It's 20-year debt period, so I think that derives what you want
To
to
invest.
Yeah.
mortgage to
Yes.
purchase.
I'm also hearing a community conversation about our recent, or maybe even not so recent history of building our sidewalks ourselves instead of contracting them out, and that it could be significantly cheaper and a cost savings to not put them in bonds.
It sounded like staff were pretty excited to do the one they're doing now on Patton Avenue. Like it was some kind of,
Yeah,
we're
we
doing
certainly
it.
do both
Yeah.
currently.
It does bring up a question, I don't know how it fits in the process, but when I look at this whole conversation, it makes me wonder about leverage and metrics for leverage over time. I think that, I've been looking at some things around housing where, I mean, this is a specific example to show the bigger theme I'm talking about of like working with a CDFI, maybe instead of us directly working one project at a time, one developer at a time for affordable housing, we have a CDFI, we give them 5 million, they go out, leverage that for 50 million and start making those loans and we don't administer it at all. That's a tiny example that might not even fit into our context. And it does make me wonder, as we're looking at this, what are the leverage opportunities? It's not necessarily do we set a leverage metric when we pass this, but I'm very curious about what the policy conversation for that could be, as well as some other metrics of time to spend. So, again, I think that what are some of the metrics that are going to be important for the success beyond just issuing the money? I have an appetite for. I'm not sure where that fits in the timing of the discussion, but I'd be curious to hear what my fellow councilwomen think. Like, what are we going to ask every year after we issue this debt? Are we successful? Have we met a leverage? Have we got percent completion, what have you? Those type of things I think would be important for us as we're going to the public in November to say, not just project complete at the end of 7 years is success. This is what interim success looks like, and personally, leverage is important to me.
And the transparency of the dashboard was really helpful. Throughout the past few years, I've been able to point in that direction. As long as it's updated, it really helps to tell the story and celebrate our shared successes as we move forward. So if we can keep that up and keep building on it, would be really helpful.
Sounds good. I also think that, again, coming from a community who issued every 2 years, alternate with the county, is that, we had goals for affordable housing units.
Yes.
We passed this debt, we're going to try to deliver these numbers of units. And that helped,
I
I
would,
think,
That-
get at least the community excited and it's incentive for us as staff to, we gotta go get it, these are the numbers of units we said.
I would
we're
love
gonna
us
deliver to
incorporating
the
that into
community.
this process.
In Charlotte, it was the city 1 year, and 2 years later, Met County, then okay.
We
So that,
alternated.
they were getting the stagger,
Yep.
but across both local
So
governments.
with the four,
And then were you partnering on things in there?
Some things.
I mean, we're getting
More
really good
economic
at that,
development
but,
things.
okay.
so would the 4-year cycle give us a chance to do that?
It would.
Stagger with
We're
the
on
county.
time with it right
I
now,
mean,
because
if
the
we
county just did one.
coordinated with the county,
Yeah.
absolutely. I believe that it would,
Yeah,
because they just did it last year,
yeah.
Would,
and then we would be doing it this year.
That gives me a little hope for this 4-year plan.
And again, we're not trying to,
Yeah.
well, we are kind of trying to sell y'all on the 4, but we would do the assessment and the
Yeah.
analysis, and we'll bring back, because we truly understand what we're trying to do. We're
Yeah.
just trying to have impact,
Yeah,
and the quicker we can do that. But our caution, again, is, can we afford it? Do we have the capacity to deliver? And what is the impact on the property owner? Because there is no net neutral, revenue neutral option
Right.
for us. It will have to be a tax increase.
When you come back,
Well, now, just hold on.
Possibly.
Careful.
It is a reval, so,
It-
you know, and if you look at the property values that have increased, it is, so the rate doesn't necessarily increase. So I just want to say, I mean, it's not as simple as saying everybody gets 2 cents more on the property tax bill. Sometimes the property tax rate doesn't change at all, but people whose properties have appreciated a
Right.
lot pay more. People whose properties have not don't.
Won't
So
pay as much.
It's, caveat, we don't know the math yet, but we will
Well,
be required to disclose the math.
We will be required to disclose in that.
So,
I'm gonna, oh,
well, I just have something that's kind of a broader thing, and I want to request it for the future, I guess, because, you know, we start talking about property tax and who's paying for all of this, and then tonight we have a bid on, you know, I'm wondering, can we pull the data for how much the CBD produces in our property tax? That figure, how much of the
How
whole
much
it
property
represents?
tax?
We've seen it in years past through other private firm presentations, but I would love to get a real figure. And then I guess I also want to elevate a concern about this potential for how the property tax assessors at the county are assessing and if it is having an inequitable impact on some neighborhoods. We hear about it. We've never seen like a staff reply to that or something. I just have looming concerns that there may be something the county needs to be doing differently before we take on more bonds, that it may actually impact some folks in ways that are inequitable, but we don't know. I'm being told, I've seen slides, I don't know what the county's doing. Is there a way for us to kind of get a synopsis from the city's perspective of if that's the case?
I would also
Because
like
what
to see
was,
that.
yeah, what was left on the table, I think, was a staggering, like, $5 million a year, or $7 million a year, or something in other revenue that would come to the city had that assessment been done differently. And I just don't know I don't know how true all of this is, or if we have an opinion on that.
I think we definitely would have to work with the county
Yeah.
to get that information, because that's just not in our wheelhouse.
Sure.
Nor do we have access to that data.
And it's really impactful to whether or not I want to support all these bonds, I'll tell you, because I don't want to perpetuate harm, as we talk about tonight, seizing harm, right? We don't want to perpetuate harm, and if there is harm, I'd like to know it. And I just need verification of that.
Yeah, I believe at some point, and it may have been around the last reval, we had the tax assessor come and give a presentation about that, and I would imagine that that's something that they would be amenable to the city manager's point. I think from a staff perspective, you know, like, because that's not, no one in this organization does that, I don't know that we're really equipped to say whether the county's doing it.
So does that mean we need a third party to look at it? Like, it just still concerns me. I don't want to speak for everyone. It concerns me to this day.
I would think that we would ask the counties their opinion. I know that a kind of a third party did an assessment,
Yeah.
came up with some concerns and issues about inequitable assessments, and even potentially questioned the methodology that
Right.
this county was using in terms of tax assessments. But I would like for them to be able to respond to that
Sure.
versus us.
and my understanding is the county's hiring additional headcount in that department. It's in their proposed budget, or that's a conversation which
Yeah.
was like a grain
do
of
it more.
salt in the
Mhm.
context, but I'd love to hear the big picture
Yeah,
from them.
and maybe they are all on board with it. Maybe they're fixing or addressing
Yeah.
these issues. Maybe the
Don't
issues
really
haven't been, I have no idea. But
Yeah.
I feel like I need to know for me to have this broader picture before we potentially increase taxes for residents.
We can certainly reach out to them and see.
Yeah, absolutely, we will do that. We
The
have
county's
a
going
num-
to be here tonight, we could even ask them.
We have, the last piece of this presentation is on the fees and charges.
Yes.
And we know that our next meeting starts at 5. This is a fairly lengthy presentation, so we will do really highlights so that we can give you all a break at 4:30, if that's okay, just to, and then we'll start again at 5. And you will see this presentation again tonight, if that's okay, more detailed. The fees and charges. We were going to give you.
Does it need our action tonight? So we're going to see it now for 15
Yeah.
minutes, but then really at council.
And it's already been to, policy
Policy
and finance, so some of us have seen it, but
Yep.
All right, I think I got the message to move quickly. So I will attempt to do that. As you all know, we bring these to you annually as part of the budget process. We do that before the proposed budget so that we can communicate to customers about changes before July 1st, and also so that the proposed budget can incorporate any changes that you all approve. Fees and charges are a small part of the general fund revenues, as I discussed earlier, but the major revenue source in all of our enterprise funds, most of our enterprise funds. And as mentioned, our recommendations were approved by the Finance Policy and HR Committee. They include modest increases to the fees that most households pay for water, stormwater, and solid waste, some adjustments in parking fees, and then some minor adjustments to the curb installation fee based on a material change. I won't go into any more details about that. And then a number of changes for water that are primarily related to development and based on the cost to deliver those services. So looking at that typical residential, and please feel free to stop and ask questions if you have any. Typical residential household impact, so this is kind of our standard customer. Solid waste fee doesn't change. It's the same for everyone. Tier 2 stormwater, you can see that increase, and then 6 CCFs per month of usage for a residential customer. So the total of all of our recommended increases annually is about just under $20 a year for, again, our standard household. On the water side, as you all know, we have some aging infrastructure and deferred maintenance. Not the first time I've said that today. We've identified about $240 million of needs, capital needs in the water production and distribution system. We did this cost of service study and financial plan that really helped us to identify that we have some inequities amongst our rate classes, and what we want to do is rebalance what those are so that ratepayers are paying the fair share of what it costs us to deliver that service. So we have that information. We've developed what we think is a good, equitable, multi-year approach to adjusting those fees. We have a big meter replacement project underway right now, and that will help us with some of these challenges. And then we have some grant opportunities, to the earlier point about leveraging, that are helping us address some of these needs. In the committee, we discussed kind of a 3- and 5-year phase-in option. Staff are recommending the 3-year phase-in because we think it ensures that equity among the rate classes. We're already kind of prolonging that inequity with a 3-year phase-in, so we think 5 years is just a bit too long. And then it helps us on the financial side to establish reserves faster, make sure that rating agencies know we're committed to addressing these capital needs, and ultimately the rates at the end of a 5-year plan would need to be higher than the 3-year plan to achieve the same reserve targets. So focusing in on just the change that we're asking you all to approve, you can see that there's just a minimal change to the 5/8 inch meter on the base fee, so that fee is not variable. And then the volumetric fee, so that's what you pay based on consumption on the right-hand side. No change on the single-family residential side, but a number of changes for the other ratepayers. And again, that's about that cost of service study and ratepayer equity. I do want to make note, because this was discussed, that this does, as I said at the earlier one, mean that there is a small increase to residential customers based on that 3% increase in the base charge, but that there's no change on the volumetric side. So what does that mean for customers? Again, for residential customer, a relatively minimal increase, and then, I won't go through the details of the other rate classes, but I will acknowledge that those are significant. But again, we think this is right-sizing what our customers are paying for what it is costing us to deliver those services. Before I move on, any questions about water?
I just wish we had some real-life examples of what these really turn into, like somebody using that much water.
So yeah, these are actual customer bills that we pulled. So these are like real usage for these different rate classes.
Like, where is New Belgium on there?
That
Right.
I do not know the
This,
answer
you know
to.
what I mean? I'm just looking for context. I didn't, yeah. It's okay.
you've told us before, though, how many customers actually fall into the manufacturing and commercial How many manufacturing customers do we have? Do you know?
I can find out before we
It's-
have to do the
We will.
presentation.
We will have the resources
Yeah.
Yeah,
later.
because I feel like when we did this before, it's a really small number.
It
Or
is.
actually fall into the,
Mhm.
one of the category. I think it was that one, but I don't remember.
Yeah. Wholesale is definitely small because it's
Well,
essentially.
wholesale's just
It's like
Black
11
Mountain,
counties.
Woodford, whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's small.
So I will move on to parking services. Again, similarly, we have some substantial deferred maintenance needs. As you all heard in the fall, we have that parking garage assessment that's recommended repairs to make sure that we extend the useful life of our parking garages. Those total 11.3 million. Some priority repairs are already underway. We also are working on a review of parking services to assess the actual service delivery model and look at opportunities to expand and change the fee structure. So really what we're trying to do is minimize the changes right now and focus on generating the revenue that we need to address these capital improvements. Our recommended changes for on-street include two things. One is increasing the hourly rate 50 cents from $1.50 to $2, and the other one is extending the enforcement hours, which is they are only enforced Monday through Saturday, 3 hours in the evening. Right now it stops at 6, and this would suggest or propose to stop at 9, stop enforcement at 9 p.m.
I want to pause and share that later this evening, I'll propose, or I guess I'm proposing it now, that we don't extend the hours for on-street, that we maintain that so that the folks coming in to enjoy our city, to work or go on a date, don't have parking after 6, but that to still pursue our goals for good infrastructure, that we increase the daily rate to $2.50.
And perhaps expand meters, right? We've talked about meters in other areas of the cities for almost a decade. I feel like it was promised, that we would look at Biltmore Village, West Asheville, South Slope, and it has been just all over the place. And I would love to know if there's an update on that, what the plan is, what kind of income that would produce, because I'm hesitant about these late night hours as well.
So to address that question, I think that's one of the things that we're hoping this assessment is going to kind of guide us towards what that looks like. That I know is something that's been discussed and recommended in the past from previous assessments.
Did it give us enough information, like that would be another 1,500 meters? Because we know what our average meter makes a year.
Sure.
Do we have anything?
I think it's a little bit of a guess, right? Because different areas may have different usage, et cetera. I'm not sure that we're confident in what those amounts might be, but we can talk with the transportation folks about
And
what
may I
that
ask-
might look like.
And what I'd like to know is, basically, if we do talk about expanding the meters, to Biltmore and these different areas, so I'm wondering if you have an idea as to the cost to actually install
them,
them. Because basically, that may be something that sort of washes where, if that is even an option right now until we get enough money in our coffers to be able to.
There's that, the upfront and the
Yeah.
maintaining of, like sending the vehicles out to ticket and
Exactly.
stuff. There's a lot
So-
of built-in
So that's
costs.
the reason I was
Yes.
just wondering if that could give us.
We have past analysis, but, I mean, it's important. So we really have to vote on these fees tonight for this whole process to keep moving forward in a timely manner.
We are recommending that. We have certainly had past councils.
Yeah, we try to do the fees before they bake it into the budget or
Right.
throws the
It
budget
just gets
off.
complicated.
You don't feel comfortable?
I just
yet?
wish there was more discussion time. Like, I've been hearing from restaurants and breweries and businesses about water rates, and now I'm hearing from folks about parking, and I don't feel like the community had a lot of time to,
I mean,
Digest
I will say in fairness, these have come to policy and finance, so I think there has been a lot of conversation. People have been involved seeing the policy finance conversation, so that doesn't change the
Okay.
fact that there's 7 of us and we all have to weigh in, and I hear that as well.
yeah.
But I do wonder too, though, if maybe Ben, and I'm calling on them while they're sitting over there, but I know that the water department has been engaging with some of these customers, and so there's been a lot of conversation that we're not a part to, and maybe they
Yeah.
can tell us more about that tonight during the meeting and be able to.
We'll do that.
It would be great if during the meeting tonight, we knew the number of meters that were affected in those categories, and if we could hear a little bit about the conversations that have been happening. I know there's been direct communication with the wholesale customers preparing them. You don't want to go blindsiding the other towns in your county with this, and some of these larger customers that'll see these significant changes in their rates. So maybe they can tell us a little bit about those conversations.
And don't forget, we started this assessment and this analysis in last fall, winter, and we have been trying to communicate and do it ahead of time, even before we went to the committee, to say this is going to get some airtime, so this is what we're going to be recommended. And again, if there was any way that we wouldn't have to adjust rates, we would not do it. This is for us to be both financially and fiscally responsible, but there's such a tremendous need. And the only assured source of revenue that we have are fees and
Just-
property taxes, for the most part.
It's unfortunate, I know, but, you know, we also have responsibility around engagement, and I'm glad that the committee has brought it up. But I saw the email today from that long list of businesses and groups of businesses that said, you know, we'd just like to be at a table to talk about it for a minute. And I don't know that they had that avenue. Maybe they did at your committee meeting. I didn't see that, so.
I do want to spend just a minute talking about some of the reason behind these recommended changes. I think first and foremost, to the manager's point, it's funding those identified parking garage repair needs. And without, again, to the point, without some additional fees, we are not going to be able to fund those repairs. We also think that there's some other opportunities with the extension in the evening hours. One is it does require some additional enforcement that may give us, or is likely to give us, some capacity to address some neighborhood parking issues, which parking has taken over from APD. It captures the value. There is certainly some demand in the evening time, so capturing the value of that evening parking demand and ensures some availability of spaces. Right now, you know, since they are free, right, like if you are at Parker, you go pay for an hour, perhaps at 5 o'clock, you can stay there till the next morning, essentially. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have that availability so that folks that are coming downtown and enjoying it can find a spot near where they're trying to go, and that we're driving some of that longer-term parking into the garages where we think it makes more sense to be. I will skip ahead because we did anticipate a question, so I did want to show this kind of looking at our recommendation versus a higher amount. Again, it really, from a dollars perspective, is roughly equivalent.
Yeah. That's great.
But it doesn't have the increased cost that we would have of potentially, if we can even staff it, have the staff for the late
Right.
hours.
Correct. It would not require any additional staff to
So
increase
is
the
that
rate.
estimate bundled in here?
Yes,
Yeah.
in the staff recommendation.
Yeah, I really like this one.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I know several of you were working on this for last week. I appreciate everybody's effort.
So maybe we conclude, you will get, I mean,
We're
I
in.
think we hit the two
Yeah.
most, I think, probably what you're hearing from our customers. We covered those two increases, proposed increases, and we'll continue the conversation later on this evening. Thank you all for your input, the guidance and direction that you've given us. We've got a lot of work to do, but that's why we have these work sessions, so we can come back and make sure we are responding to issues and concerns and additional information and so forth that you all need for us to be comfortable making a manager's recommended budget in May. So we actually have 2 work sessions, I think, in April.
We have one scheduled currently.
One scheduled currently. We may have to have another one. So thank you all. We appreciate your time, and we'll
Thank you, staff.
give you 30 minutes back.
Thank you all.
Yeah, recognizing
Keeps
our
us
staff
awake
back
for the
there,
next
'cause
6
they're,
hours.
yeah.
I don't know how long
Thank
I'll
you.
be here.
Thank you.
And Mayor, I turn it over to you for adjournment.
Okay, anything else? We're gonna adjourn and be back here in 27 minutes. Thank you.